We all know what generosity is, but by the end of today, I'm hoping maybe you'll view it just a little bit differently. When we give to others, we give to ourselves. When we fill others, we fill ourselves. When we uplift others, we uplift ourselves. A kind gesture rewards us equally. Generosity is a boundless and abundant fountain that never runs dry. And John Kabat-Zinn says, be generous with others, creating feelings of joy and interconnectedness. And so we'll kind of explore all of that for a few minutes before our meditation. So generosity is described as being kind and unselfish. It is the virtue of being liberal in giving, often as gifts or material things, but also, and maybe even more importantly, in spirit, giving of time, kindness of the heart, and often putting others' needs in front of one's own. And for this reason, generosity is regarded as a virtue by many of the world religions and is often celebrated as such because generosity, in fact, boosts our moral tendencies and pro-social behavior. And side note, many times we don't always give ourselves the credit we deserve for being generous because it can come in many forms, small and large. And on the fundamental level of being human, we do have a predisposition for goodness. It's been researched and shown that we do. And we can see this time and time again in how we respond to someone in need or come together in a crisis. Strangers pulling people out of burning cars or forming a human chain to save victims of a riptide or a flood. So let's talk about the research just a little bit. Scientific investigation into generosity has examined the effect of an individual's generosity and has linked it to the production of neurochemicals such as oxytocin. And just to put that in layman's terms, that's the caregiving hormone that is released in new mothers and in other situations, but we can relate to that fierce, protective, loving new mother. And it also shows a direct relationship with the pro-social feelings of empathy. According to Psychology Today, research shows that small acts of generous behavior can cause the brain of the person giving to light up with a warm glow, marked by increased levels of happiness. And the brain imaging data also shows that Scrooge-ish type of people who act solely out of self-interest were less happy and did not emit the same warm glow in other words, the same area of the brain did not light up when studied in an fMRI machine. Civil society benefits when all of us are cooperative and generous in some way. And from an evolutionary perspective, a Canadian study called Altruism Predicts Mating Success in Humans found that we are actually hardwired to be attracted to generosity and turned off by selfishness and greed. How about that? We like generosity on a primal level. Generous behavior appears to be like a magnet that attracts potential mates to one another like moths to a flame. So remember that the next time you're going on a date. So then there's something called conscious acts of kindness. Well-known positive psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky's research shows that doing deliberate and random acts of kindness boosts our self-esteem, increases happiness, and even reduces stress. Even more importantly, though, doing 5 in one day seems more impactful than, say, spreading it out over the week. So something to think about. Like practicing gratitude, which we explored last week, we can see that generosity boosts positive emotions and increases resilience. And now another act of generosity that isn't often thought of in those terms is forgiveness. Forgiveness is an act of generosity that rewards the giver and receiver equally. And even if you are forgiving and the receiver doesn't even know you are benefiting from it. So practicing even small acts of forgiveness can improve our own resilience. And so why not start with the guy who cut you off in traffic, right? Lastly, I would really invite you to consider viewing generosity through the lens of common humanity. And what do I mean by that? So begin to look at another person, a stranger, as someone just like you, someone with dreams, desires, and goals, someone who wishes to be happy and wishes to be loved. So when we view others through this lens, our inclination to be kind and to be generous and giving in spirit just naturally increases. All right, so again, something to really be aware of. And so, as I said earlier, we're on the last foundational attitude, and we can look back over the weeks and see how the 9 foundations are weaved together and they support each other to increase mindfulness. Not only mindfulness, but the end result is that it increases our own resilience, right, in our daily lives. So, just a real quick recap of all preceding foundations. Non-judgment, having a kinder, more curious approach allows us to investigate our experience with greater objectivity and openness. And that results in greater equanimity in how we approach life, right, on the more macro level. And in this more open approach, we can begin to have the patience, which is foundation number 2, necessary just to allow things to unfold in their own time, or simply to be as they are in the moment, just because they already are, rather than resisting or struggling with this to cause further chaos and mind movement and stress and distress. And then to further enhance the process of greater openness and objectivity, we can practice bringing a beginner's mind to each experience as if it's for the first time, using that same curious, kind attention. What's unique and fresh? And seeing things from this fresh perspective can encouraging a non-striving attitude, right? Releasing a need for things to be a certain way or to not be a certain way. And then there's a certain amount of trust, which was one of the foundations in ourselves, that's required to be able to relax into the unknown without judgment and with a greater degree of patience. And before we can practice acceptance, another foundation, we also require the trust in our own innate wisdom. And then letting go, we saw that we explored that, and that's a big one, right? That requires us to release judgments that may be filled with expectations. It requires the patience to see what new possibilities can emerge. And it also requires a trust in our own innate wisdom and our own authority, not looking outside of ourselves. So as we practice the first 7 foundational attitudes, we might begin to notice greater clarity, right? That is a benefit of practicing mindfulness, and to see before us what we have to be grateful for, which was the next 8th foundation, was gratitude. So there's this spaciousness that develops in which we can experience gratitude for even very simple moments and very mundane tasks. We can even find joy and have gratitude in those moments. So the more that we practice gratitude, the more resilient we become, and the more likely we are to be generous with ourselves. And then, of course, being more generous with others. So practicing both gratitude and generosity, they create this loop of positivity, loop of positive emotions that really go very far in reinforcing and enhancing our well-being. So as you can see from, if you followed us the whole 9 weeks, you can see that these foundations are all woven together, and they do come together and they support each other to create this strong foundation from which we can build our mindfulness practice on. And it is a practice, and we always have to keep that in mind. We can always come back and begin anew. And that's the beauty of mindfulness. Each moment is an opportunity to begin anew. Okay, so let's begin our meditation. So I would invite you to find a supportive posture, making an adjustment if that's necessary, and then closing your eyes if that feels comfortable, or maybe just gazing softly in front of you. And then once you've settled on a posture that's supportive, perhaps directing your attention to how stable the lower half of your body is and how it supports the upper half, allowing it to rise, and perhaps taking a moment to just gently balance the head above the neck and shoulders, and then reaching the crown of the head towards the ceiling or the sky. Perhaps noticing a little bit of lengthening in the spine. And in this supportive posture, finding perhaps some dignity, and maybe allowing the attention to come to rest on wherever you're making contact. So the contact points of feet on the floor, sits bones in the chair. Maybe noticing clothing where it's making contact with your body. And perhaps also having an awareness for the air around you. Maybe feeling a little bit of coolness or warmth on the cheek or on the forehead. Now, maybe taking a moment just to invite a little bit of softening into the body. Maybe noticing if there's any areas of tension. And if there are, perhaps allowing your awareness to drift to a particular area of tension, whether it's the neck or shoulders, perhaps giving the shoulders a shrug and bringing them up to the ears and then letting them drop. Maybe noticing the jaw. It's quite often an area of tension. Is it clenched? And if so, just inviting a softening, having no judgments about it, and just inviting a softening, perhaps allowing the palate to loosen and dropping the tongue from the roof of the mouth. Maybe noticing facial muscles or muscles in the forehead where we often furrow the brow. So just breathing a little ease into any areas that you might feel some tension or tightness in. And then on the next breath, inviting your attention to focus on the simple act of breathing. And bringing your awareness to each round of the breath. Not needing to change it in any way, but perhaps just noticing how the breath is in this moment. Maybe it's easy, but maybe it's not. So just paying attention to how the breath is following each inhalation and exhalation all the way to the end. And if the mind wanders, that's perfectly fine. That's exactly what it knows how to do. But as you notice the mind wandering, then you also may note that you are present once again, and then just gently inviting the mind to return to the task at hand, which in this moment is just being with the breath. Allowing the breath to be the anchor into the body and the anchor into this present moment. So just continuing at your own pace, following the breath, perhaps just noticing the qualities or noticing where you're feeling the breath most vividly today, even more specifically in this moment. So really tuning into the minute details of the breath, sensations you might be feeling, noticing any qualities, if the breath is long or short, shallow or deep. So as you're staying with the breath or staying close to the breath, on the next breath, I'm going to invite you to think about the word generosity, kind of leaning into, weighing in on it, rolling it over the tongue. Generosity. And maybe thinking back to a time when you experienced generosity, maybe even as far back as when you were a child and perhaps experiencing the joy and excitement of the first time you received, or one of the first time you received a birthday gift or a holiday gift. Or perhaps as a young adult or even an adult, just an unexpected act of kindness or generosity from someone else that you weren't expecting. So a few things may have come up. Hopefully, a few things have come up, and you've been the recipient of a few acts of generosity and kindness, and just bringing to mind. So, settling on one and just bringing it to mind, whether it was that childlike or is that childlike experience of opening a gift and the surprise of it, and just remembering how that felt, calling to mind as much detail who you were with and where you were, the feelings, the emotions, the sensations in the body. And likewise, if you settled on an act of generosity that was somewhat unexpected, small, medium, or even large. So just remembering surprise of that unexpected kindness or generosity. Perhaps feeling seen or heard or validated in some way or loved. And just recalling the situation with as much detail as possible, the emotions, any physical sensations or warmth in the body, fullness in the chest, bubbling of joy. And just taking a moment to savor that experience. And now just gently releasing that into the background. And now think about a time when you were generous to someone else. And once again, it doesn't have to be a monumental act of generosity. It doesn't have to be a material act of generosity. It can be just a smile or kind look and acknowledgement of someone in a circumstance where they may not even have expected it, maybe a stranger. So just calling to mind a moment where you were generous with someone else. And once again, calling to mind the details, the emotions, the sensations. How did it feel being generous? And how did it feel seeing the other person's appreciation of your generosity? So once again, letting that kind of percolate, recalling the thoughts, emotions, sensations, warmth, lightness, groundedness, or even feeling gratitude, maybe even a hint of satisfaction with yourself. So some kind of an acknowledgement, perhaps, on your part that you were kind, you were generous. And allowing yourself just to savor, recalling the emotions and thoughts and feelings. So just savoring it for a moment right now. And maybe in that savoring, yes, giving yourself some credit, acknowledging that, yes, you were kind and generous. And then lastly, I'd like you to think about others in relation to yourself, and maybe choosing a person that you encounter but don't know well, and someone that you may normally not really see, maybe even look right through, like a grocery store clerk or a cashier, or the guy who owns the dry cleaners that you frequent. So just choosing one such person that comes to mind and now taking a moment to imagine them exactly as you. And just as a small act of kindness or generosity is uplifting to you, imagine how it would make them feel. And in the spirit of seeing them just as you, think about your own deepest desires. And isn't it to be happy, to be loved, to belong, to matter, to be seen? And then now imagine that this person holds these same values dear. They have these same wants and desires. And this universal wish to be loved, to be seen, can become the looking glass through which we can begin to see all beings. And then this becomes the lens of clear seeing through perhaps through which our generosity becomes a more known way of being and maybe even can become our default mode. Just gently holding this in your awareness, attending to the breath once again. We'll end with a poem called Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it's only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. So as you're ready, perhaps wiggling fingers and toes and bringing your awareness back, gently, slowly opening the eyes. And I want to thank you very much, all of you, for whether you came for one or all or just somewhere in between, for joining us in this exploration of the 9 foundations of mindfulness. And thank you for your practice. I'm going to leave you with an invitation for the week. And that is to practice 5 random acts of kindness or generosity in one day and notice. So really pay attention. What does that feel like in the body, the mind, and the emotions? And do you notice any kind of a sense of uplift or more positive feelings? So that's the invitation for the week.